The house my husband and I have lived in for a while now has an Airbnb next door as neighbors. It has been operating for close to a year now as an Airbnb. My husband and I often noticed the guests coming and going. Most of them would stay to themselves, and a few would talk to us, but they were all nice people. However, one night in late September, we encountered some creepy guests who were staying at the Airbnb. It was a warm evening, and we were settling down to watch a movie when I noticed movement outside. I glanced out the window and saw a younger-looking couple in the Airbnb's backyard. They seemed to be setting up something odd with candles and laying other things down on the ground. I showed my husband, and we both agreed that it was strange. Our best guess was they were setting up some sort of ritual. However weird it was, everyone has their own unique hobbies, and who were we to judge what they wanted to do with their time at the Airbnb? We watched them for a while, unable to tear our eyes away. Firstly, it was just fun to watch, but also, we wanted to make sure that nothing extremely creepy was going on. They took a while to set up, so eventually we got bored and went back to watching our movie. Before going to bed, I checked out the window to see if the young couple was still out there. They still appeared to be just hanging out with whatever stuff they had set up, so I dismissed it and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I was gradually awoken by sounds coming through our bedroom window that was open for air. I could hear soft murmurs outside, low and rhythmic. I glanced at the clock, which showed that it was past 2 a.m. now. I woke up my husband, and we went to check out why the neighbors were still up at this time. We got out of bed and made our way to the back of the house and looked out the back window towards the backyards. Surprisingly, this time the young couple was in our backyard, standing and making strange movements in the flickering candlelight. It appeared they were doing whatever ritual thing they had set up earlier. What was even stranger was there were some lights in the woods, which were way out on the property away from our house. I guess the couple had set up some candles way out in the woods as well, but I wasn't sure. It didn't make sense. Somehow, it felt scarier to go outside and confront the couple about being on our property, rather than just let them continue what they were doing. We double-checked the house, locking all our doors and windows just in case before going back to bed. The next morning when we woke up, we cautiously walked into our backyard, checking to see if anything was damaged. It looked like the couple from the Airbnb had already left, since their car was gone. Everything was normal in our backyard, thankfully, besides a note that we found in the middle of the lawn pinned down by a rock. I bent down and picked up the small piece of paper and unfolded it to read it. It read, "Thank you for your participation. You have been blessed. Nothing major happened to us in our yard that night, but it was just really creepy in general. We left a message with the owner of the Airbnb, recommending not to let that young couple stay in again in the future if they tried to." This happened last year and still creeps me out when I think of it. So I was at home one night by myself. I was just in my bedroom scrolling through my phone. All of a sudden, I saw this Snapchat notification from a name that I did not recognize. I was curious, so I went to Snapchat and opened the snap to see. It was a selfie of what appeared to be a man. However, this photo was taken extremely close to his face, and he also appeared to be in a very dark room. I could barely see his face at all, and didn't recognize it to be anybody that I knew. The picture honestly looked very creepy. There was no words with the picture, and that was it. I guess at some point, I must have become friends with this guy. I didn't know when though. I had Snapchat for probably 10 years. I did not send a picture back, but instead typed a message for the guy, asking who he was. Then he sent another photo. When I opened it, I saw that it was much like the one before. It was honestly so creepy. I wish I would have screenshotted it, but I didn't. I thought that maybe the person sent a picture like this by mistake, but after the second one, I realized that it was not. I asked again who it was. The person's response, though, really shocked me. He simply said, "I'm coming over now." I thought that he had to be joking, but I also realized then that I had my location on Snapchat. I quickly went into the settings and turned my location off. If this guy was serious, I was hoping that he would not know where I was. Then I blocked the mysterious guy. I thought that was it. I returned to what I was doing, but I couldn't help but feel a little bit creeped out by the whole thing. Well, roughly 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I had a terrible feeling instantly.
I think by now it was like 10 something at night. Not a normal time for somebody to come to the door. I carefully left my bedroom and went down the hallway. Eventually, I got to a window that I could look out and see who was there. When I did, I saw a man wearing a ski mask standing there. I couldn't believe it. The guy must have got my location before I had turned it off. I watched him knock on the door again. Then he started to look around. When he did, I quickly moved back and away from the window. I heard the guy walk off the step, but did not know where he was going to. The next thing I knew, I heard him right outside one of the main windows. I ran back into my bedroom and then called the police. I locked my bedroom door and covered my window. Then I just waited. I did not hear anything during this time. I wasn't sure what was going on, if he was trying to break in or maybe if he left. About 10 minutes later is when the cops arrived. They came to the front door and I told them about what happened. They offered to look around, and I almost said that they didn't have to, but I ended up saying sure. Then they looked around my backyard, and surprisingly found the man hiding in some bushes. When they located him, they asked him to come out. He ignored them and then tried to run. However, the police caught up with him before he left the yard. It was the same guy who had been Snapchatting me. I'm not sure what his plans were. I'm just glad that he was caught.
This story takes place in the fall of 2016, right in the heat of the whole killer clown thing that was going on for a while. My cousin and I were both in middle school at the time, and I was staying over at his house one night. There were quite a few people in the house that night, including us, my aunt and uncle, and my younger cousins. It will be easier to understand the story by explaining the layout of the house and yard first. They lived in a rather large double-wide trailer that they bought that was positioned on a flattened part of a hill. Their driveway is a rather steep gravel slope that connected to the road at the bottom of the hill. Behind the house and up the hill was nothing but woods. My cousin and I were the only ones still awake this night, watching TV in the living room. We kept hearing noises in the woods behind the house. We could see into the woods from the window in the living room where we were sitting, but we didn't pay much attention to the noises since it was kind of windy. Plus, my uncle had lots of motion lights outside the house. The motion lights were positioned in the back facing the woods, the side door close to the driveway on the opposite side of the house, and on the porch that overlooked the front yard and the road. Because of all the motion lights, we weren't too worried about anyone or anything being outside, since anything out there would trigger the lights. We had heard lots of stories and watched lots of YouTube videos about the whole killer clown thing that was popular at the time. Personally, I didn't think that it was real. I thought it was just prank videos. Also, we live in a small town in northeast Tennessee, where everyone owned some sort of firearm, including my uncle. We were never afraid of anyone dressing up as a clown and trying anything. The only lights on in the house were the TV and the dim light up above the kitchen sink that was only a few feet behind the couch. Suddenly, the motion detector light in the backyard turned on. We noticed, but we didn't think anything of it. The lights were set on a 10-minute timer, and if it detected movement, it would stay on and turn off after 10 minutes if no other movement was detected. After 10 minutes, they went back off, so we figured that it was just an animal, which wasn't uncommon. After about 20 minutes, I went to the bathroom down the hall. I did my business and washed my hands. But when I came out of the bathroom, the motion light on the side of the house by the side door that entered into the laundry room turned on. I could see it shining through the thin blinds that were on the door. I heard what sounded like footsteps on the gravel outside, and then the doorknob started rattling quickly like somebody was trying to open it. Luckily, the blinds were shut, so whoever it was didn't see me. I ran back into the living room to tell my cousin. My cousin had heard the same thing I did, because he was already up and halfway into his dad's room to wake him up. At that point, I saw the light from the front porch come on, so I got up to look out the window that looked out to the porch, but I couldn't see anything. My uncle had quickly grabbed his pistol and a flashlight and was out on the front porch looking for whoever or whatever it was. My cousin and I were behind him on the porch watching. He looked around with the flashlight for a bit, and eventually we saw something. There at the bottom of the hill in the ditch by the road was someone dressed up as a clown in a cheap-looking costume. The clown was facing up the hill towards us, and it just looked at us and waved. My uncle fired a warning shot, and the clown ran across the road and into the woods. My cousin and I didn't sleep anymore that night, while my uncle stayed out on the porch for a few more hours to make sure that nobody came back. I don't doubt that it could have just been a high school kid playing a prank trying to scare whoever was in the house. After reading some more experiences with these clowns of people's lives actually being threatened and in danger, it still scares me to think of what the clown would have tried to do if he was able to get inside the house. When I was about 8 years old, I remember that I took a train one time with my older sister. She would have been 15, I think, and we were going to visit our grandparents. It was just us two, and we were just going for the weekend. Our grandparents lived a few hours away, but there was a train route that went from our city to theirs. My sister and I liked trains, so we wanted to take the train there, and our parents agreed. I remember that we first got to the train station in our city, and it was pretty busy there. Soon we boarded the train and got into our seats. The ride was pretty smooth, and we sat by the windows and watched things go by. I would say that the train was almost completely full with passengers. When we arrived in our grandparents' city, we got off the train along with most of the other people. Some of them were staying to go to the next stop though. So my sister and I walked into the train station, and I guess our grandparents were not there yet to pick us up. As we waited, my sister said that she was going to use the restroom. I didn't have to go, so my sister walked off and I kept standing there. I looked around the station, and it was very busy with lots of other people around. After about 2 minutes or so, I remembered that this woman approached me. I didn't know who she was, but she pointed out to the train and said that my sister was boarding it. I figured that we had to go back on the train and this wasn't our stop, so I started to walk over. The woman then went with me to the train, and we both started to get back on. Now, to this point, I had just kind of been following my sister. I was young, and I didn't know exactly which stop was ours or which city we were even in. I just figured that I hadn't seen my sister after she had come out of the bathroom. So I actually got back onto the train and then went back to my seat, but I didn't see my sister there. I was confused, so at that point, I started looking around the train, thinking maybe she switched seats. The woman who was with me was sitting in the next row over. I didn't ask her where exactly my sister had gone or anything. Instead, I was just silently looking around. After about a minute, I actually saw my sister. She was walking just outside of the station and seemed to be looking around, probably for me. I got up and started to walk for the doors of the train. When I stood, the woman also stood up and asked me where I was going. I told her that my sister was not on the train, and I started walking away. The woman did not say anything back to me. She also didn't go after me or anything. I left the train and then walked over to my sister. I was very confused at this point. But when I reached my sister, she asked me what on earth I was doing back on the train. I told her how the lady told me she had been on, and I figured that we had to take the train to another city. My sister told me that we were in the city that our grandparents lived in, and she didn't know what that lady was talking about. I realized at that point that I may have avoided something bad. The train left a very short time after that, and we got picked up by my grandparents. Looking back at that, I'm really glad that I saw my sister and got off the train when I did. I live alone in a house and have lived here for 2 years now. This is an event that took place several months back and is still very fresh in my memory. So it was nighttime and I was alone in my house and in my bedroom. The house is not very large and my room is on the ground level. As I was watching TV and sitting on my bed, it was starting to get late and was maybe 11 or 12. Because it was late, things were very quiet aside from the volume on my TV, which was not that loud. All of a sudden, I heard this noise from the back end of my house. It sounded like maybe from the backyard, and it seemed like somebody had hit a back window. Before I could compute what was going on in my head though, I heard glass breaking. The sound was coming from the same area. Then I knew that somebody was breaking in. My first reaction at that point was to run to my bedroom door and lock it, which I did. I heard whoever had gotten in the house was still at the back side of it. Then my next course of action was to dial 911. I went over and located my phone, which was also on my bed. I quickly scrambled to dial for the police. Then I went to the back corner of my room.
As soon as someone answered the phone, I said that my house was being broken into. I gave my address, but I spoke as quietly as I could. I didn't really hear anything during that time as far as where the intruder was, but maybe 30 seconds later, I heard the footsteps approaching the hallway where my bedroom is. Then, moments later, they arrived right outside my door. I muted the phone and tossed it aside in a panic. I didn't want them to hear me. Then, the intruder tried opening my bedroom door. That got me really scared because I had hoped that maybe they wouldn't want to be seen. I felt like they knew I was in here, but possibly they just wanted to see what was in the room. Maybe they just wanted to steal stuff. But now they were coming straight for me. After the door did not open from being locked, I heard a loud man's voice. He yelled for me to open the door now. It was very angry, and of course, I was not going to do that. After a few seconds, he banged on the door very hard 2 times. At that point, I just wanted to get out of there. I debated trying to open my bedroom window and jump out of it, or I could look around and see if I had anything to use as a weapon. I didn't really have much of anything though. I was heading over to the window and the guy started to walk away. Then I stopped. If he was leaving, I didn't want to run into him out of the house. I wasn't sure where he was going though or what he was doing, but I was just moving off of instincts at that point. My mind barely was even thinking at all. I don't even know how long this went on, but I was basically just pacing around and listening for the man. I didn't really hear much though. After I have no idea how long, I heard my back door opening. Then, probably like 30 seconds to a minute later, I heard noises out front. I still thought that it was the man, but it was actually the police. They came inside and I finally left my room. After searching the house, the man had left out the back door just a short time earlier. Some other cops searched the neighborhood and were able to find the man. He was caught just a block away, which made me feel 100 times better. I didn't know who he was or why he chose to break into my house. I'm really glad that my bedroom door had a lock on it though. If not, I'm not sure what would have happened.
When I moved into my first ever house after living in apartments for many years. I was excited to have my own house with a small yard as well. The house was not the nicest one ever, but it was decent. The neighborhood was pretty typical. There were a bunch of houses on both sides of a quiet street with fairly small yards. After moving in, I was working on unpacking everything one day and I got a knock at the front door. I went over and saw a woman standing on my front step. I answered the door to her and she said that she saw that I had just moved in. She had a box of cookies and gave them to me as a welcome gift. I thought that it was really nice of her and I told her thanks. We talked for a short time and she told me that she was my neighbor and lived down the street. Then she left and I went back inside. I remember that a few days later she showed up at my house again. This time the woman asked me if she could borrow a screwdriver and said that she didn't have one. I did, so I went and got it and gave it to her. We chatted for a very short time about basic stuff and then she left. I remember when she was walking away though, I was expecting her to live maybe next door or right across the street. But I saw her turn and walk down the street and then go so far down that she went out of my sight. I didn't even see what house she went in. I still assumed her to live on the street, but I was kind of surprised that she didn't live closer. So the next day she brought the screwdriver back. When she did, I asked her where she lived exactly. She just told me that she lived down the street, not too far. I remember asking which house, and she just kind of pointed and said you couldn't quite see it from here. So a short time later, she left again. I watched her walk away, and I even walked a little farther out to see where she was going. Well, she literally walked to the very end of the street, and then left the block going to another street and went out of my sight. I was very confused. Why did she keep coming to my house? And how would she even know that I moved in if she didn't even live on my street? So I remember that one of the days after that, I was mowing my lawn. It was a weekend, so my next door neighbor happened to be mowing his lawn as well. We both finished at around the same time and met each other. We got to talking a little bit, and he said that he had been living in the neighborhood for over 20 years. I mentioned the lady to him and I asked him who exactly she was, and after I described her in the best detail that I could to the guy, he said he had no idea who I was talking about. He thought that the situation seemed strange. So for a few days after that, I didn't see the woman or anything. But then, one day, I had work in the city. I worked in a pretty typical office building downtown. So the really weird part is that after work, I was walking down the street to get to my car. I saw this car parked on the side of the road amongst many others, but I saw a woman behind the wheel of one of them who appeared to be the same woman who was my neighbor. She was sort of far away. She appeared to look at me for a second and then look away, and when she was looking away, I didn't have a good view of her at all. I kept going and I soon made it to my car. I was not at all 100% sure that this was the same woman, but it sure looked a lot like her, and I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid. Well, I saw her again several nights later. It was pretty late at night, and I was staying up much later than usual. I remember that I was watching this one movie that was on TV. So when it was over and I was finally going to bed, I happened to walk past the living room window in the front side of the house. As I did, I saw someone walking on the sidewalk out front. It was a woman, and it was strange for anybody to be out this late. But when I looked closer, I saw that it was the same woman who I kept seeing. I was so confused by this that I was just standing there staring at her. She then turned and looked at me. When she saw me, even from far away, I saw a surprised look come over her face. Then she started walking off rather quickly. I actually went over to my front door and opened it up. I was so confused that I wanted to just ask her what was going on. When I opened the door, I went outside and stepped out into the yard. The woman turned and looked over her shoulder as she was walking away. I called out to her, asking what was going on. She did not stop, but instead turned back and started running. She ran out into the street, and I got to the end of my yard, but I didn't leave my property. I was not going to chase after her, but I wanted to see where she was going. The woman then ran to a car that was parked on the side of the street, across and a few houses down from mine. Then she got inside and quickly drove away. I was left as confused as ever. If she was my neighbor, why would she be driving away from here? I just went back inside and went to bed, and surprisingly, after that, I never saw the woman again. I'm still very confused about it. I'm not sure who she is or what she wanted.
In 2014, I joined a Facebook group that was started specifically for people who are from the town I grew up in Southern California. The whole group shared memories of the town, and everyone seemed nice, except for one person. There's always at least one asshole. This guy got on the bad side of one of the admins, whose name was Robert, and ended up being booted from the group. I'll note that I was in my mid-30s at the time, and most of the members were at least 20 years older than me. Robert was approaching 60, and was married with children who were about my age. Robert took a liking to me. Since he was married, I didn't think his friendship would go any further than that, but I was mistaken. He said that I was a down-to-earth girl, and was easy to talk to. He and I exchanged phone numbers, and he would message me quite a bit. However, Robert took it a step further, and found out where I lived, my landline number, and my mother's address in California. He had a subscription to one of those sites that contain information on people, their age, phone numbers, possible relatives, previous addresses, etc. He found out through Facebook when my birthday was, and he sent me flowers. I thanked him, but I started to get suspicious. His behavior was becoming alarming. He started complaining that all his wife wanted from him was his pain pills and money. Around this time, I met the man who would eventually become my husband, and of course, I announced it on Facebook. Robert went into a ballistic rage upon hearing this, saying that I should have known that he was in love with me. I told him, "You're married. Why are you in love with another woman?" He began texting me at least 10 to 20 times a day, going from calling me hateful names to profusely apologizing. I blocked his number, so he started blowing up my landline. Most of the time I kept it unplugged, so I didn't get most of the voicemails that he would leave. One day, out of curiosity, I did listen to some of the voicemails I got. In one of the messages, he claimed that I owed him $13,000. He then started making threats about how he would come to where I lived, and would also pay my mother a visit. I blocked him on my landline, and informed my mother about the situation. Robert got clever, and started texting me from random numbers located all over California. He even sent letters to my home, and nothing he said in those letters made any sense. That's when I decided that I needed a restraining order. I tried twice through my county court, but since I lived in Washington State at the time, The judge wouldn't grant it, since we lived in different states. Once Robert found out that I couldn't file a restraining order, he sent me more hateful messages and told me that I would never get rid of him. So I went back to court with the new messages. For this new hearing, Robert mailed in a letter of rebuttal. He claimed that he was a civil servant who had worked at a school district at one time and was an electrician by trade. He also said that he was on disability and couldn't drive longer for more than a half an hour without experiencing excruciating pain, and posed the question, how could he possibly come to Washington State? I told the judge that this wasn't true, because he openly posted all day about his motorcycle trips to Malibu on Facebook. Regardless of the evidence, I wasn't granted a restraining order, and I felt failed by the system. I blocked him on all social media, emails, and phone numbers, but he obviously would still call using new numbers. He made a duplicate Facebook page with my profile picture and sent out friend requests to all of my friends. He had my real Facebook profile blocked, and I found out when a friend messaged me, "I got a friend request from you, but I already thought we were friends." My friend then told me that this fake profile of mine was making all kinds of posts talking shit about me. My friend reported it, and thankfully Facebook took it down. I changed my cell phone number, and I eventually moved into a new place. Things died down for a while, but Robert somehow found me on LinkedIn. After that, I straight up deleted LinkedIn and Facebook, and I saw that he even followed me on my YouTube page. I don't know how to remove someone, so I just blocked him there. To wrap up this insane story, I've included a couple of recordings of the messages he left.
Hey, I need you to unblock me and respond to me, please. Would you consider doing that? It's the Christian thing to do, don't you think? Please, I'm not playing around. Bye. Look, if you don't respond to me, you're not leaving me too many choices here, and there only leaves me one, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to blindside you. I wish you would just talk to me. We could work this out, but obviously you don't want that. But you're not leaving me much of choice, and I won't be going after a paycheck. Bye.
It was a Friday night, and my friends and I decided to hang out at the park. We were bored, and the night felt perfect for some fresh air. Around 10 p.m., we heard a car approaching. It was slow, the headlights cutting through the darkness. At first, we didn't think much of it, but then we noticed it was moving towards us. As it got closer, we could see that it was an old beat-up sedan with the windows tinted, so we couldn't see who was inside. Probably just somebody passing through, I said, trying to shrug it off. But as soon as it got closer, the car stopped right in front of us. We looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The engine idled, and the driver's side window rolled down. Staring out the window that had just been rolled down was a clown, complete with a painted face and wild hair. He had a wide grin that looked more unsettling than friendly. "What's up, kids?" he shouted, his voice high-pitched, and he asked us if we needed a ride. We all exchanged nervous glances. Nobody said anything, and we just hoped that he would drive away. There was something off about him, his smile and the way his eyes seemed to be darting around. The clown called out to us again, saying, "Come on, don't be shy." My friend Sarah was the first one to say anything, as she whispered to us that we should leave, her voice shaking. She stood up, and we all followed her lead, backing away from the bench. "Wait, where are you going?" the clown asked, still grinning. "I'm just trying to be friendly," he said. We turned and ran towards the nearest exit of the park. I looked back once, and the clown was still sitting there, his smile now more sinister. We didn't stop running until we reached my house. Out of breath, we piled into the living room, slamming the door behind us. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. We were all on edge, checking the windows to make sure that the clown wasn't following us. We eventually relaxed a bit and put on a movie. Hours passed, and at around 1 a.m. after the movie was over, my friends began to leave one by one. After the last one left, I locked the door and turned off the lights. I settled onto the couch, thinking I might finally get some sleep. But then I heard a faint sound outside, an engine slowly driving up the street. I walked quietly to the window and peeked through the blinds. There it was, the same old sedan from earlier, and the window rolled down with that same clown staring straight at my house. His face was illuminated by the dashboard lights, and his grin seemed wider than before. He just sat there, motionless, as if waiting for me to make a move. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself or risk being seen. I stayed away from the window, pacing in the dark. The engine continued to run, and I could hear the faint sound of some circus tune music playing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I didn't want to look, but curiosity gnawed at me, so I moved back to the window to take a look outside. I could see the clown now tapping his fingers against the steering wheel, still wearing that disturbing grin. Suddenly, he turned his head towards my window, as if sensing I was watching. My heart stopped, and I ducked down quickly, wondering if he had seen me. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the car door slam. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of footsteps. But instead, I heard the engine rev and the car speed off into the night. That image of the car and clown inside scared me for a while, and for the next couple weeks I was paranoid, always checking around me if it was nearby, especially at night. A couple of years ago, I bought a gaming computer on Facebook Marketplace. I've been wanting to buy one for a while, and I knew that they're typically very expensive. So that gave me the idea to go on Facebook Marketplace and look for a used one. After several days of looking, I found one that I wanted. I decided to reach out to the seller and ask a little more information about it. The seller was a guy named Jeremy. We went back and forth a little bit, and I decided that I wanted to buy it. It was a pretty good deal, so we agreed on a day that I would go over and get the computer. It also came with a monitor, keyboard, and mouse as well. So after I bought it, I took it home, set it up, and started using it. I was happy with my purchase, and I used the computer for the next week and a half. Then I got another message on Facebook from Jeremy. He said that he wanted his computer back. I was really confused when I saw this, because he had just sold it to me like a week before. He said that he changed his mind and wanted it back now. I didn't want to return it. I liked the computer, and I had already installed several games and other programs on it. I told Jeremy no, I wasn't going to return it. Then Jeremy said that he would give me a certain amount of money for it. The funny thing is that the amount he offered was less than I paid for the computer by a few $100s. I pointed that out, and he said that it was all he could afford to give. Now, when he originally said he wanted it back, I assumed that meant he would pay the full price. I said the answer was still no. I was really annoyed that this guy was trying to get the computer back, and even more annoyed that he wasn't offering the full price. If he didn't want to sell it, then he shouldn't have sold it. However, Jeremy was not happy that I refused to give the computer back. He then sent me a friend request on Facebook, and then started messaging me a bunch of times. I ignored him for a while, but after he kept sending me messages for like 3 days straight, I blocked him. I thought that was that. This situation was strange enough. But unfortunately, that was not the end of Jeremy. Probably about a week after I blocked Jeremy, he showed up to my house. I happened to be home alone and was in my bedroom, on the very gaming computer that I had bought from Jeremy. It was nighttime and about 8 p.m. and dark out. I heard a knocking coming from the front door. I got up and left my room and went over to the living room and then looked out of the window. Jeremy was there on the front step. I recognized him from when I bought the computer. How did he know where I lived? This was really strange. I watched him stand there and knock again on the front door. I was wondering what on earth he had planned. Did he think that by showing up at my house unannounced that would make me change my mind? I stayed in the living room and ignored his knocks. I was hoping that he would just go away, and most of the lights in my house were off, so maybe he would think that I wasn't home. But I watched Jeremy hang around the front step for several more minutes. I was kind of looking around, and I had to move back from the window so that he wouldn't see me. He came back and knocked again on the front door, this time louder. He also yelled, asking for me to come outside. I still ignored him. I walked back to my bedroom, hoping that Jeremy would eventually give up and leave.
When I got back to my room, I put in some headphones and sat back down at my computer. For the next 5 minutes or so, everything was fine. But suddenly, I heard a knocking sound. I took out my headphones and looked to the direction of my window. Jeremy was standing there, looking into my bedroom. I got up and ran over to the window and closed the blinds. Jeremy started yelling at me, but I couldn't really hear what he said very well. I left my bedroom and went back towards the living room. By that time, Jeremy had made his way back towards my front door. Then he started banging on it again. I went over to the door and shouted to him that I was going to call the police. Jeremy yelled at me to give the computer back. Then I called the cops. I told them what was going on, and Jeremy still wasn't leaving, and he continued to stay there, even after I got off the phone with the police. But unfortunately, he finally left just moments before the cops got there. I talked to them, gave them a description of Jeremy, and told them my side of the story. After that, the police left and said to call back if Jeremy ever returned. I was afraid that he would, but luckily he didn't. I still have a hard time believing how crazy it was, and I can't believe that that actually happened.
Back in
This is something that happened back when I was a freshman in high school. I'm also a female, and this was about 10 years ago now. So the story begins when I got this friend request from a random guy on Facebook. I looked at his profile and saw that he appeared to be around my age, and we did have a couple of mutual friends. His profile said he went to a different high school, but it was one that was nearby in just the next city over from mine. I accepted the friend request because of this, and I was also slightly curious of how the guy knew about me. For the most part, he looked like a pretty typical kid though. Not long after I accepted his friend request, he sent me a message saying hi. I said hi back to him, and we started having a basic conversation. I don't recall everything said, but the conversation continued into the next day. I remember that's when he asked me if I wanted to hang out with him. Now, I had only just met him, and we went to different schools. He seemed nice to that point from talking, and I almost said yes, but then I ended up saying no at that point because I just didn't know him well enough yet. He said maybe some other time, and I said yes to that, but not making any official plans. For the rest of that day and into the next, we continued to talk on and off. Well, the next day, later on, after I got home from school, he told me that he was going to come to my house and pick me up. Once more, I did not feel comfortable to hang out with the guy yet. I told him that I would not be able to, but he didn't respond to me for a while. About 20 minutes later or so, he told me to come outside, saying that he was there. I got a bad feeling about it, and also realized now that this guy must be at least 16 years old if he was driving around. I walked over to the front of the house and saw that there was a car parked out on the side of the street. It was a red 4-door sedan that was kind of old looking. However, the windows were rather tinted and I could not see inside. I was really surprised that he had driven all the way to my house. At first, I felt kind of bad for him to drive all that way and not hang out with him. We had been talking for a few days, and most likely he wouldn't be a bad guy, so I almost walked outside and got into his car. But my parents were also home, and I would have to tell them where I was going, and I didn't think they would want me to go with this guy. After thinking about it for a minute or two, I decided not to go. When I said maybe we'd hang out another time, I didn't mean just drive to my house. He texted me on Facebook a couple more times, urging me to go outside already. I told him that I had some other place to go though, which wasn't true, but I didn't know what else to say. Eventually, he said okay, and he drove off. After he left though, I got the realization that I never told him my address. It sort of creeped me out that he knew where I lived. I didn't know how he would know this. We did have mutual friends on Facebook, so possibly he knew one of my friends and asked them. Either way, I was much less comfortable even talking with this guy anymore. However, despite that very same night, he continued to send me messages. I remember that this was several hours later, probably 9 or 10 at night. He asked me where I was and what I was doing. I told him that I was just in my room doing homework, which I was. After that, he did not respond right away. I don't remember what assignment I was doing, but I was pretty focused on it. I sat at my desk in the corner of my bedroom. About 20 minutes later though, I heard this car driving down the street slowly outside. My bedroom was at the front end of the house, and I could see out to the street. We also lived in a pretty quiet neighborhood, and at this hour, it was rare for somebody to drive past. So hearing a car driving slowly just got my attention for some reason. I remember lifting up the blinds and glancing out the window. When I did, I saw this car moving very slowly and sort of pulling over to the side of the street, across from our house and a little ways down. That's when I realized this was the same red car with the tinted windows. I looked back to Facebook, but there were still no new messages. He hadn't told me that he was coming over again, and he didn't tell me to come outside either. I was expecting him to tell me again that he was there and to go with him like before, but he didn't. As the car continued to just sit there outside on the side of the street running, I kept an eye on it. After several more minutes, the driver's door opened. I saw a man get out, but it wasn't some 16-year-old kid. It was a grown man, probably like 40. He got out and started walking in the direction of our house. At this point, I quickly got up and ran out of my bedroom. I went towards the living room, and luckily my parents were both still up and in the living room. I didn't have time to tell them the whole story, but I alerted them of the guy walking. My dad got up and went over to the door. I looked through the front window, and by now the man was walking on the side of the street towards our house. My dad went over to the front door and opened it. When he did, the man kept walking farther away down the street, in the opposite direction of his car. My dad actually went outside and followed the guy, calling for him to stop. But at that point, the guy took off running. My dad did not run after him and came back inside. That's when I told my parents the whole story of how I thought I was talking to a kid my age, and also how he just showed up without me giving him my address. My parents called the police at that point, and my dad went and stood outside in the front door, seeing if the guy would head back for his car because it was still there. When the police arrived, the man was still nowhere in sight. They spoke with us, and then went out and looked for the man. He had to show up eventually because of his car, and when he did, the police got him. After that, I learned a valuable lesson about Facebook and social media. I was much more careful with who I talked to online for the rest of my high school career. Back in the day, I used to work at Sears. This is when they were doing really well and had tons of stores. If anybody doesn't remember Sears, they were a large department store that sold many things like appliances and clothes. It's mostly gone out of business in recent years though. But when I worked there, we would get lots of people in the store. Well, one time I was working a long day in December. With it being around Christmas time, there were lots of people shopping for gifts and stuff. It was also a weekend, so that added to it. I worked basically all day, and I saw countless people. When I was finally off of work, I was happy to go home and was tired. So I just remember that I clocked out of work and then left the store. I went out to my car and then drove back home. It took maybe 15 minutes or so to get back. Then I parked my car in the driveway and got out of it. However, as I was walking up to my front door, I heard a car coming down the street, which was usually very quiet. I noticed it, but didn't really think that much of it at all, and I kept going. However, as I was opening my door to go inside, I happened to hear the car slowing down. I looked over to see that the car was starting to pull over to the side of the street in front of my house. So I stopped and I kept watching it because I wanted to see what this car was doing. I did not recognize the car as a neighbor or anybody that I knew. The car pulled over and came to a stop just in front of my mailbox. Then the driver's window rolled down a little, and I saw somebody open up my mailbox and then put something inside of it. I couldn't really tell who the person was from where I was. I think it was a man, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyways, I didn't really know what this person was doing or what they had put in my mailbox. After that, they rolled their window back up and then they drove away. I went back outside, and after seeing that the car was out of my sight, I walked down to my mailbox. I opened it and I looked inside to see an unmarked envelope. I brought it inside. When I opened up the envelope, there were several Polaroid pictures in it. They were all pictures of me. The first were me working at Sears earlier that day when I was at the registers working as a cashier. I had not known that any of these photos were taken. They were taken at a distance too, so it was not obvious to me and I never noticed it. There was then a photo of me walking in the store, I think when I went on my break. And the last photo was of me walking out to my car in the parking lot after work. This was clearly taken from inside of a car that was also in the parking lot. I hadn't noticed any of them. Of course, I was very freaked out by this. I didn't know what to do about it or anything. I didn't go to the police or report it, but I did tell my friends as well as coworkers. They were all just as confused as I was. The rest of my time working at Sears, I didn't notice anything else like that, and I never saw that car at my house again. I'm not sure where the pictures are. I think I still have them somewhere, but I couldn't find them. It's been so long. But I'd still like to know why that person did that. Was it just an elaborate prank? Why would they choose me though? And they must have followed me home without me noticing. It's all very strange.
I'm one of those people that's always getting a new phone. I get one almost every year. For me, it's just a personal preference. A lot of times, I trade in my old phone for a new one, but that's not always the case. I happened to just buy a new iPhone a while back, but I still had my old one, so I decided to sell it on Facebook Marketplace. The phone was still pretty new, and I figured that somebody would want it. I listed it for a reasonable price, and within a day, someone had made me an offer. I sold it to them, and after receiving payment, I shipped it to the buyer, which was a man named Elliot. Now, everything seems normal, and it was. He got the phone, and I thought that was the end of that. But maybe like a week later, I got a friend request on Facebook from Elliot, the buyer of the phone. I didn't know him at all, other than that he bought my phone. I clicked on his profile, and I knew that he lived in the same state, in a city that was like an hour or two away. When I clicked on his profile though, there wasn't all that much information because we weren't friends. I thought that it was kind of weird though, so I declined his request. The next day, he sent me a message. He asked me why I declined his request and said that he really wanted to be friends with me. I told him, I just sold you the phone. I don't know you at all other than that. Please don't take it personally. I just don't know you. He kept sending me messages though. He called me some things that I will not repeat here, and he seemed pretty angry. At that point, I blocked him. It was really strange to say the least, but I thought that was the end of it. Now, Elliot did not contact me through Facebook or any other social media for that matter after that. What he did was much worse.
This happened one summer afternoon in 2018 when my partner, my stepdad, and I decided to check out an abandoned factory near my parents' house. We were just picking up my partner when we passed by it, and without thinking much about it, we started talking about exploring the place. My stepdad, who tends to act on impulse like us, pulled over right by the building and we decided to go for it. It didn't take long to find a way inside. The factory was falling apart with broken windows, walls crumbling down, and most of the roof was missing. The only real obstacle was a doorway that had some debris in front of it. We cleared that away, and as soon as we stepped through the door, something felt off. It was the middle of the summer, but the air inside the building was freezing cold. I don't mean it was a little chilly, it felt like winter. It wasn't even a damp kind of cold, like what you would expect from an abandoned building. And anyway, there was enough holes in the walls and roof that it shouldn't have been that cold. The inside was just as trashed as the outside. Piles of broken machinery, rusted metal, and old wooden beams lay scattered around. As we moved farther into the building, my partner and stepdad went ahead to check out another room, and I wandered off by myself to look through some cabinets that had been left behind. It was like everything had just been abandoned overnight. Files, worker IDs, and even older sheets from the late 90s and early 2000s were scattered everywhere. Most of the orders were packed and ready to be shipped, but none of them had ever been sent out. My stepdad pointed out how strange that was, and the factory looked like it had been closed for many decades, even though the most recent date I found was 2002. The building at most had been abandoned for 16 years. I have no expertise in something such as how quickly buildings decay, but the whole place seemed very run down for only 16 years. As we were talking about how weird the place was, I started feeling something else. It wasn't just the cold or the dust or the abandoned vibe. I was getting a feeling of danger, like something was watching us, or maybe waiting for us to leave. I can't describe it any better than that. It was like my fight or flight response kicked in, but I didn't know why. I told my partner and stepdad, and they agreed that we should head out. It was odd, and we hadn't heard anything or seen anything strange, but we all felt it. We made our way back to the car, and just as we were pulling away from the building, my partner and I both noticed something. In the doorway we had just come through, standing there, was a figure. It was hard to make out clearly. It kind of looked human, but not exactly. Something about it didn't sit right. It was like a person, but not.
The figure didn't move, as it just stood there, staring at us. My stepdad didn't seem to notice since he was too busy driving. My partner and I looked at each other at the same time and asked if we had seen that thing in the door, so it was definitely not our imagination. We never went back to the factory. I can't shake the feeling whenever I drive past the building to my partner's house. I drive past the abandoned factory so often, and I wish I had never gone inside, because I think about it every time I drive by. Each year, when I was a kid, we would celebrate New Year's Eve and stay up late. Normally, I would go to bed at about 10 o'clock, but on New Year's Eve, I would stay up until around 2 a.m. My sister and my parents and I would play board games and watch movies. We would then watch the ball drop when it was midnight and would stay up for several more hours. I think this happened when I was about 12 years old. That time, like any other, we played games and watched a couple of movies. This continued well past midnight, and at roughly 2 a.m., we all got tired and finally decided to go to bed. We could sleep in the next day because nobody had work or school. Our house was on a pretty quiet street. Other than that, it was a pretty typical neighborhood. I stayed up a little bit later than everybody else that night because I was watching a movie in the living room. When it ended, I finally went to bed. I remember getting back into my bedroom and turning out the lights. When I did, I could see very clearly into the front yard because of the moonlight. There was a woman standing in our yard. She was not facing me, and I didn't recognize her. I walked over to the window, and when I did, the woman turned and faced me. She saw me and then started to walk closer into my direction. This really creeped me out. Nobody was supposed to be in our front yard. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I moved away from the window and hid. I ducked down and laid on the floor so that she couldn't see me. My window was pretty large, and I did not have a cover on it at the time. Now, my bedroom was also on the second floor, so she couldn't directly reach me, but I was still terrified. I waited there, just hoping that she would go away. A few minutes went by. Then, I heard something hit my window. I wasn't sure as to what it was. I started watching my window, and something else hit it. The woman was throwing sticks at it. She was trying to get my attention, and I don't know why, but I got up. I carefully looked out of the window again. The woman was still there, and looking right up at me, this time closer. She said something, but I couldn't hear her. Then I saw her motioning for me to let her inside. I was not going to do that. She then walked to the side of the yard near the front door. Then she knocked on the front door. I didn't move. I was hoping that my parents or sister would wake up. I didn't have the thought to call the police for some reason. It just never entered my mind. The woman knocked on the door on and off for like 5 minutes. Finally, she walked away. I watched her from the window walk to the end of the driveway and then a little ways down. She then got inside of a vehicle and drove off. The whole situation was really bizarre, and it really confused me. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no idea what she could have been doing either. Luckily, though, she never came back.
I was selling a desk on Facebook Marketplace a few years ago. It was a pretty nice desk in my opinion, and I had bought it from IKEA just 2 years prior. However, I was going to be moving and I decided to get rid of it. During this time, I lived in a smaller house by myself. I remember that after I made the listing for the desk, it took a couple of days before I got any responses. When I did, I got a message from a man named Charlie. He said that he wanted to buy the desk. There wasn't a whole lot of conversation between us other than that. I was happy that somebody wanted to buy it, and I made sure that he was good with the price, which he said that he was. I thought the price was reasonable, so I was glad to hear that, and then I gave him my address. We agreed that he would come by the next evening at about 5 o'clock. And when the next evening rolled around, I had the desk just inside of my front door for Charlie to come and buy. He got there at about 5, and I let him inside of my house. Charlie was skinny with somewhat curly blondish hair. He was wearing a sweatshirt. After we said hi to each other, I showed Charlie the desk and I told him that I could help him take it to his car. Charlie went up close to the desk and looked at it. After a short time, he told me that the desk did not look like it did in the pictures. I asked him what he meant. I was very confused because it was exactly the same as the pictures. I had taken them just days prior when I had listed the desk, and I really hadn't touched it since. Charlie said that it just wasn't how he thought it would be. Then he said that he decided not to buy it. I was disappointed, but I said okay. Then he turned and left. I was confused by what he had said. I'm not sure what exactly he was expecting, because in my opinion, the desk was just as it was advertised in the listing. I decided to just move on, and hopefully somebody else would want to buy it. So the night went on, and I ended up staying up pretty late. It was nearly midnight. I was in the other room, and I heard the sound suddenly of somebody trying to open the front door. When I heard this, I walked over and looked out of a front window. I saw a man standing there, wearing a hat that was mostly covering his face. But I then realized that this was Charlie. I didn't know what he was doing. After literally trying to open my front door, he then walked away, but he didn't leave. Instead, he walked around to the back side of the house. He tried that door, which thankfully was locked. After that, things were quiet for a bit. Then he returned to the front. This time, he actually knocked on the front door of the house, but I was not going to answer it. After being at the front door, he moved to several windows. It seemed like he was trying to look inside. I had covers for most of them, but I could still see his shadow on the other side. After he was still in my yard prowling around for that long, I decided to call the police. I told them the whole story, and within 10 minutes, an officer was there. Meanwhile, Charlie had stayed there the whole time. When the police arrived, he tried running, but was quickly caught. He did not break in, and I think he ended up getting off for the most part. I have to think, though, that he was trying to find a good place to break into my house. I'm really glad that he didn't.
This story happened when I was in college. I was a graduate student living on campus about an hour away from my parents' house. When the week of Thanksgiving came, I went home after classes on Monday. We had the whole rest of the week off, so I would be staying at my parents' house for a little while. When I got back home, the second day, during the night, I was sleeping in my bedroom when I was awoken. Now, my bedroom is on the first floor, and it's on the front side of the house. It was the middle of the night, and I thought that I heard the sound of a knocking on my window. It was really creepy. I sat up in bed and looked over to the window. There was a curtain covering it, so I couldn't really see anything. I did not hear the knocking again, so I got up, walked over to the window, and looked out of it. When I looked around the yard, everything seemed fine, and I didn't notice anything. I still didn't know what made the sound, though. I went back to my bed and sat down, still looking in the direction of the window. That's when I saw something move past the window only for a brief second. I couldn't see any details because I really just saw the shadow from the other side of the curtains, but somebody had definitely walked past outside. I got up again, ran over to the window, and looked out. Whoever it was gone again. I glanced all around the yard at what I could see, but I never saw anything at all. I went back to my bed again and sat back down and didn't see anything for the next few minutes. I didn't know exactly what was going on. After it seemed like things were back to normal, I tried to go back to sleep again. I laid down and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, when I was starting to fall asleep, I heard knocking again on the window. There was no mistaking it. I sat up and saw that somebody was right outside. I couldn't tell who they were because my curtains were still closed. I could just see like a silhouette of their figure. It looked to be a man. Then I heard what sounded like a faint laughter coming from the other side of the window. It was really creepy. I turned on all of the lights to my bedroom and then saw the guy finally moving away. He left my sight, and when I got to the window, he was gone again. Somebody was definitely messing with me, but I didn't know who or why. I stayed up for quite a while before finally was able to go back to sleep. The next day, I told my parents about it. We were unsure of what could be done. There were no signs of an attempted break-in. I couldn't even give a description of the man. We just hoped that it wouldn't happen again. The next day went by as normal, but that night I stayed up late watching TV in the living room with my parents. It was a little bit after midnight when we all heard a noise coming from the other room. We all got up at once and went over to a window. From there, though, we couldn't see anything. We heard the noise again. Now it was more clear that somebody was hitting my bedroom window. We called the police and then moved as far to the other side of the house as we could. We heard another noise. After that, things were quiet for a while. The police arrived really fast, though. When they got there, they found a man hiding in our backyard. None of us knew who he was. The guy had been trying to break into our house through my bedroom window. The window hadn't even broke, though, but there were some marks on it. I'm really glad that he didn't get in. I'm also really glad that I was not in my bedroom at the time, but with my parents in the living room. It had to be the same guy who had been there the night before. Since this happened, every year when I go back to my parents for Thanksgiving, we joke around about it. At the time, it wasn't so funny though, and I'm really glad that everyone is okay.
It started one Saturday afternoon when I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through social media. I switched to a new phone and a new number a few months ago. My old number was still active, but I didn't think much of it because it had been quiet. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and when I looked down, I saw it was a text from my old number. The message read, "I see you." It was odd because I thought it was just some spam or a wrong number, so I shrugged it off. A few hours later, another message came through saying, "You don't remember me?" I had forgotten to change my number on a few accounts, so it was possible that somebody had gotten a hold of it. I decided to reply, trying to keep it light, and I typed back, "Who is this?" The response was quick and said, "You know who I am." I didn't want to engage further, so I put my phone down and tried to watch a movie, but the messages nagged at the back of my mind. The next day, the texts continued, saying more creepy and odd things. I stopped replying for a while. Monday brought more messages, saying things such as, "I'm closer than you think," and "You'll remember me soon." I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Somebody is texting me creepy things from my old number? It felt ridiculous. By Tuesday, I was on edge, and I couldn't focus at work. The messages were escalating, saying, "I know what you did last summer," and kept repeating, "You'll remember soon." I tried to block the number, but it kept coming through, so I finally decided to involve the police and see if they could do anything. I explained the situation, and they filed a report. The messages continued for all the next week, and I tried to ignore them as best as I could. I finally got a call from the police a week later. They had traced the text back to an old acquaintance from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He had been using some sort of app to send the messages from my old number. That night, I confronted him at his house, and his parents answered the door, so it ended up working out perfectly to involve them as well. It was awesome to see his face when he came downstairs and saw me talking to his parents and showing texts that he had sent to me. So that was the last problem I had with the kid, but it was still scary before I knew who was behind it all.
This is a story that took place back when I was a kid. I was probably somewhere between the ages of 8 and 10. At that age, I loved Christmas, mainly because of all the things that I would get. I lived with my parents, brother, and sister in a 2-story home in a typical neighborhood. Each year, we would do lots of decorating inside and outside of the house. Our Christmas tree would go in the corner of our living room, and all the presents would go underneath it. On Christmas Eve that year, we went to my grandparents' house, and then we were going to my uncle's on Christmas. That night on Christmas Eve, after we all went to bed, I had a difficult time falling asleep. I usually did when I was a kid because I was always so excited for Christmas. I finally was able to doze off for a bit, but woke up sometime later when it was still the night. I remember just turning over to try to go back to sleep, but then I thought I heard a noise. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. My bedroom was the closest to the stairs, and even I could barely hear it. I looked at the clock, and it was 2 a.m. I didn't know why anybody would be up at this hour. Being that young and a curious kid, I decided to go and look. I left my bedroom and then walked a few feet to the railing of the stairs that overlooked the living room. I looked down, and everything seemed normal. All of the lights were off, but the lights from the Christmas tree and the few other decorations were on, so I could see a little bit. I looked down at the tree for a little while longer. It was very large, and we always got the biggest tree that we could find. But then I saw somebody come out from behind the tree. It wasn't my dad or brother, but a random guy that I didn't know. As soon as I realized that it was a random guy, I turned and ran. I went to the end of the hallway where my parents' bedroom was. I woke them up and told them that there was some guy in the house. I remember that my dad got up to look. He came back a short time later and said that he saw somebody leaving the house through the window. The police were called, and when they got out to our house, searched all over our property. They didn't find the guy, but they did find that our window was broken. None of us had heard it break, so the guy must have quietly done it somehow. It was a living room window that was broken, and I think that I saw him not long after he got in the house, because nothing was even stolen. I think that he either saw me or heard me, and that scared him off. I'm just really glad that he didn't try to come upstairs or anything. It still really freaked me out knowing that somebody broke in. It took me a long time to be able to fall back asleep, but eventually I was able to. That was by far my craziest Christmas experience. Nothing like that has happened since, much less on Christmas. I still don't know who the guy was though, and why he chose our house. I also don't know if the police ever found him.